Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. In this video, we're going to talk about 10 mistakes made in reggae production. Now the first thing is, when you first get started, you have to consider your budget. And after your computer and your interface, what is the next important thing? And I would say that it is your listening environment. So monitors and headphones. Now, I have the Yamaha HS8s, which I got used for $400, $200 each, and they were night and day. I made the mistake of buying a bunch of plugins, buying some rack mount gear. I always had some good headphones, but my priorities were screwed up. So the first thing you should do after you have your computer and stuff is get good monitors. Now, you don't have to spend a ton of money. If you look at the HS series, you'll see that it has a pretty decently flat response for the price, as well as the KRKs, the Rockets. Those two are probably the most popular budget monitors. Now, there's some from JBL and there's some from Mackie, so just shop around, but I can't stress the importance enough of having a good speaker system, as well as some good headphones. Now, some good brands are the AKGs, the Bayer Dynamic DT770s, the Sennheiser HD380s, Audio-Technica ATH M50Xs are also very popular. And all of those headphones that I just talked about are under $200. So if you can't afford actual monitors yet, just start with headphones. And I know it's gonna suck during mixing, but if you get used to headphones, you can make a halfway decent mix. Obviously with monitors, it's a lot better, but it's also good to check your low end when you mix with monitors with your headphones, as well as like in a car or a truck, just to see how it translates and stuff. Before you go buying a bunch of plugins and a bunch of outboard gear and stuff like that, buy good monitors and good headphones. And the second part about your sound environment is treating your room. Once you have monitors, you need to treat your room. And the easiest way to do that is to make DIY sound absorption. So I went to Home Depot and I bought some 1x4s and some rock wool and some cheap fabric, and I just made some frames and I hung them up. I have 8 in this room and it cost me less than $300. And my room is, you can't really hear the resonance in this room that much. There's a whole science to getting in, dialing in your room and getting it all perfect, which is the end goal. But here in a home studio, you know, you need to be able to mix and you need to be able to not have the room bouncing around. It's important to treat your room. So the second thing that I would say is a mistake that a lot of reggae producers use is the use of bad VSTs. Now, I started with GarageBand and the sounds were just garbage. They're super compressed. They don't sound lifelike. They suck. So do yourself a favor, once you have your listening environment figured out, and buy some good third-party VSTs. Let's take a listen between Logic's piano and the Grandeur, just for an example. So I've got Logic's Yamaha piano loaded up. So let's just listen to that. Versus the Grandeur. What do you guys think? I think it sounds a lot more full. I find that the Logic one is lacking a lot of depth. Now, as far as organs go, my two favorite organs are vintage organs, and as well as Logic's B3 organ. Logic does have some good virtual instruments. They're not all good, but the organ is really good for the organ bubble. So let's take a listen to a couple of those. The Logic B3, vintage B3 organ is really good for the bubble. It's really good. Now let's listen to Native Instruments vintage organ. It's really awesome. So I highly recommend this organ if you're looking for something realistic for like leads and stuff like that. Now the third mistake that I see a lot of reggae producers make is using fake guitar and fake bass. I'm all about using VSTs where you can get away with it because obviously this room isn't big enough for drums and I can't piss off my neighbors. But using a real guitar is like the minimum for the chop. You can't get that chicka chicka with anything but a real guitar. You can buy or you can even build a cheap guitar for under 300 bucks, I'd say. You could get a guitar that would be good enough for 300 bucks, especially with the plugins out there that model cabinets, you'd be good to go. So even if you bought a Squier, like $100 guitar, and I'm not advising you do that, but I'm just saying, if you wanted to get $100 guitar, I could make $100 guitar sound better than a fake VST guitar for the, rhythm section of reggae. So it's super important. And that kind of the same thing goes for bass guitar. You can get away with bass guitar with a synth, in reggae, especially modern reggae has a lot of synths used for the bass. And there are some pretty decent bass VSTs out there. They're getting better and better, but there's nothing like a real bass. And so if you can afford a real bass, I suggest getting one of those and then watching my video on how to make a reggae bass line. Speaking of guitar and bass, I do offer a couple of tutorials on my channel on how to play. I have a good one on guitar that you can watch, but also there's a channel, a guy by the name of J Jesus or Jota Jesus, I'm not really sure, he's Latin, so check out his channel. He's a really great guy. He's got a lot of similar content to me, so go check him out. So mistake number 4 that I see a ton of is people using rock sounding drums for reggae. There's a million rock VSTs out there for drums, and they're just like the hi-hat is really, kind of far away and not focused like it needs to be in reggae. So like I've said in my other videos, I have a sample pack that has a very articulate hi-hat as well as that rockers kind of roots radic snare drum. Another great one is rubba drum that I've talked about. I know Easy Keys has like an easy drummer that's like okay. So those are some options. There's also some loops available online if you don't want to sample or use samples and don't want to like go in the MIDI editor and use that, so check those out. Another thing I see regarding drums is that they're overly quantized. So let's listen to an example of swingy versus super straight, super quantized, because this is huge when you're gonna make reggae. So what I have loaded up here is Logic's drums. If I open up what I did here, you can see that everything is the same velocity. I have 16th notes, I have a kick and a snare and a hi-hat. But to me, the hi-hat sounds far away. It's in a room. I don't know. It just doesn't sound right. I mean, it sounds good if you're making rock music, but we're not making rock music. So you can see the first step a lot of people make is they do their drums like this, perfectly on time, the same velocity. So then let's move over here to this one, which now I'm varying the velocity of the hi-hat. So it's going medium loud to low to hard on where the chop is. I'll just play it. Right? You're getting that in the intensity building when the piano goes. I'll just add it. See? And you could add the organ and see it's perfectly on time. know, that's the other mistake, is like they're not putting the time in to make it sound real. So I'm just showing you. The first one was everything perfect, the same velocity. Then the next one was, okay, we're starting to vary the velocities of the hi-hat. That's good. Now the last step to making realistic sounding, at least just like a loop, you know, is to actually put some swing on every other 16th, as well as match that same amount of swing on the bubble, the ooh, ooh. So let's listen to that. Versus, see, that's straight, perfectly on time. The organ is perfectly on time. The 16th are perfectly on time. Now let's listen to the swing one. Okay, now let's listen to the difference of using that Logic drums versus my sample pack. So here's the Logic drums, and here's my drums. Logic drums. Now, that's super dry, right? There's a lot of reverb on these drums. So I'll turn on the reverb, some reverb, just to make it sound a little bit similar. Okay, now let's compare the hi-hats here. Versus, you hear how it's, I know there's a lot of reverb, but it's just kind of far away. It's not articulate. It's not right up there next to the hi-hat. Versus, so it makes a big difference. Your drums make a huge difference, and people are using rock drums a lot for their reggae productions, and I got good drum samples here. There's other reggae drum samples out there, so just use good samples and your songs will get that much better. Mistake number 5 is overuse of compression. Now, modern music, we're really used to the sound of compression, and no question, compression is super important in any production, but let's listen to an example of an overcompressed song versus the right amount of compression. Okay, I've just pulled up my latest song that I'm working on. So first, let's just kind of listen for a little bit to what it sounds like. Okay, so this is the compressor on my drum bus. It's barely doing anything. And I don't really have any compression on my rhythm bus. Well, I do, a tiny bit. This is the amount of compression on my drums. I have a little bit there. And then this is the rhythm section. So this little bit, it's maybe doing 3 dB of gain reduction. So let's just solo the rhythm section. And I'm adding this compressor. Do you hear how it squashes it? That's without. Just bringing everything up and then squashing it down. It's too much. So here's the drums. I'm just gonna do the same thing. So now I have both compressors on. We'll just listen to it. Can you hear how it has killed the dynamics? It's just super squashed. So that's what it was before. Nice and breathing. Too much compression. But I've heard this before. I've heard this much compression on songs. So let's just add a little bit more just to get, you know, crazy. Oh, it's so compressed. It's just taking the life out of it. All right, I'm gonna put it back. That's better. So yeah, don't over compress your stuff. Mistake number 6 is overuse of FX. I was super guilty of this when I started. I used to put spring reverb on everything. And don't get me wrong, spring reverb is awesome, but a tasteful amount is what you want to use. It's okay to have a tiny bit on every track, you know, but if you're going for a more modern sound, modern music is the vocals especially, they're almost dry. Listen back, have a little bit of taste, say, am I overdoing it with the effects? Pull in a reference track. How much reverb is on that track? How much delay is on that track? You get the idea. Okay, let's listen to this again and show you what it sounds like with too much reverb. So if I add some reverb to the drums. And now to the rhythm section. Hear it trailing off. This is how I used to make my songs. I would just put spring reverb on everything. It sounds cool, like as a dub thing, you know, like, and then take it off. So let's listen to it without how it was normally. And yes, there is reverb. I have 2 reverbs on this track. I have a spring and a plate, and actually a room reverb as well for the drums. So here's what the room reverb sounds like. That's just the room reverb. That's the spring reverb. Not very much. The plate reverb. And this is little plate. The spring reverb is my favorite, rack mount bright. And then the room reverb is the lustrous plates. So here's all the reverbs together. Oh, sorry, I had less reverb on the horns before. It was like this. Now in context with the song. I don't get this sensation of, oh my gosh, there's so much reverb. There is a lot on the horns, I'll give it that. But yeah, you know, it's just a matter of taste. Try to keep it, you know, tame. Obviously reverb makes things sound awesome, but you know, we need to be careful. So here's without the room reverb. Actually, here's without any reverb. That's the room reverb. It makes the drums sound more lively. And with the plate and spring. So yeah, just don't overdo it. Now, mistake number 7 is one that I've struggled with a lot, and that is over limiting or too loud. What happens when you put a limiter on there and you have too much gain reduction is you're literally squeezing the dynamics out of your song. And if you guys don't know what I'm talking about, let me show you a practical example. So I had the limiter shut off because I didn't want the volume to be too loud in this video. But if I play this, I have constant gain monitoring on, which means it actually it won't add any volume. It's just, you're listening to it, it's automatically compensating. But if I turn this up, that's really freaking loud. This is like where rock music -8 RMS is so loud. Now I'm gonna turn it off. You hear how the dynamics just came back? I'll turn it back on. It's just kind of pumping and has these weird artifacts. Yeah, now you can actually hear it distorting in the low end. This is what over limiting does to your sound. You're literally sacrificing dynamic range for loudness. Obviously, you're not hearing the loudness difference right now, but this is a way to show you how your sound is actually degrading when you're putting these limiters on there. So at the most, lately, because the sound wars are over, I go for 14. To me, and I had it on smooth and down here. So let me just. So let's turn it off. Oh, I have to rewind. It's off right now. So now it's back on. And it's not, I don't hear it audibly getting worse. That's the key, right? If I go way up here, it's all squashed and gross sounding. But at -14, it's sounding good. Pretty similar to when it's actually off. I had it off when we were doing the other examples. You know, 16 to 14 RMS is a good level nowadays, because if you have it really much louder than that, whatever platform you upload to is going to turn it down. So it's stupid. Just don't do it. Mistake number 8 kind of ties into your listening environment, and this is one that I have seen a lot, is having what's called a smiley face EQ on your sound. Modern music and modern speakers tend to have a bass boost in the low end, and having a lot of treble is something that we can seem expensive or really nice and airy sounding, but you really don't want to overdo it with too much bass and too much high end, because you can get in a load of trouble. So the other smiley face EQ thing is this. So let's listen. So yeah, the low end sounds nice and deep and rich and full and this and that. And the high end sounds, nice and crispy, but it's just not balanced. Like, I'll turn all these off. Look at the levels here. You can see that this is more of a natural sounding thing. If I go back to what it was, I guess I can't, but yeah, you just don't want to have too many lows and too many highs, because today's speakers already are doing that. to the sound. So you want to have it nice and flat. Obviously use reference tracks when you're mixing, and you shouldn't have any problems. Now, mistake number 9 is one that everybody, I think, deals with when it comes to production, and that is self-confidence and comparing. It is super important to reference tracks when you're mixing to get a little bit of perspective on how things should sound tonally. I'm talking EQ and effects and that. But when you're first starting, and I know I did this too, don't get too hard on yourself if your music doesn't sound amazing in the beginning. It all comes down to practice. The more you practice, the better you're going to get, and the more you're going to understand things like EQ and compression and limiting and saturation. All those things come over time. And just like this YouTube channel, I'm trying to get better at one thing every time I make a video. You know, it's a long run. You're not going to be good overnight. So don't worry about not being super good, and don't compare your sound to my sound. You know, it's always good to look up to people, but at a certain point, you know, you just got to be comfortable with where you're at, and you got to understand that you're always learning, you're always getting better. Just being artistic in nature, you're going to have days where you feel super highs and super lows. I know I do. When I make an awesome song and it sounds so good, I'm so proud of it, and then I go and I'll start a new one, and then it's like, oh man, that really doesn't sound that good. Well, yeah, it's because I'm just working on it. I just started. I only have the rough draft or whatever, you know? It'll get better. At the end of the song, I know it'll sound good because I've put in my time. I understand how this works. And if you're not there yet, I just want to say, don't give up, be encouraged, and practice, 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 because you will get there. Just hang in there. Now, number 10 mistake that I have been super guilty of is watching more YouTube than actually practicing. So it kind of goes without saying, after this video, take what you've learned and go put it into practice. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. Press the bell and the like, and I'll see you next time. Peace.